what I'll do is this actually become more polarized than I thought it would be. But I'll try to make the poles even further apart by setting the ball rolling and asking two panelists two questions, and then I'll open the floor. And I'll stick to their respective areas so that the degree of discomfort is less. First, Shukriyo, for you, a macroeconomic question. You see, India's exports are falling. The foreign institutional investors are going out of India because the US Treasury bonds have become more attractive. India is not the only country. They are deserting almost all emerging markets. And as you identified correctly, it's fine. The problem now is that how do you cover the current account deficit? India has been relying on this short-term capital flows. FDI takes longer time to come in, which is the longer. But in the immediate short term, unless you get these flows to come back to India or think of some other solution, it's going to be a problem. And in this context, I wanted to ask you, how feasible is the possibility that the government of India might want to encourage the non-resident Indians, excluding me, to contribute to a sovereign bond and mobilizing capital for that, which they have done in the past, in the 1998, 2001, and even before that. So that's something on which I'd be very happy to have your view. Shubhashita, there was one.
Supposed to ask him two questions.
No, one for him, one. Shubhashita, there was a finance minister in India whose name I am not taking. Dr. Narayan also would bear me out, who described himself as a fiscal terrorist. I'm not taking the name. But there was a time when a finance minister described himself as a fiscal terrorist and set in motion what is called as part of fiscal consolidation, the Financial Responsibility and Budget Management Act, and so on and so forth.
Fiscal responsibility.
Yeah. Now, given the fact that you are suggesting, if I've understood you correctly, that this obsessive emphasis on fiscal consolidation is actually holding back a considerable amount of resources that would have gone into social and human development. Are you suggesting that let fiscal consolidation be given up for more exhaustive public spending programs, and let India to that extent be prepared for a period of relatively low growth and allow the social and human development indicators to come up? You know, is it some sort of a China-like process where the emphasis is going to be more on redistribution rather than, you know, this obsessive preoccupation with high growth? Maybe I can start from the right now, Shukriyo.
Okay, it's good you've asked me this question because I kept saying, talking about priorities, but the only way I could get some response is by putting it that way. Because what bothers me is that every time we talk about the fact that we have a very young population, we are going to get the demographic dividend and all of that, right? That is something that we dream about. Yet whatever it takes to be done is something we are unwilling to do because we claim that we do not have the fiscal space to do that. The interesting thing is that when we did have the fiscal space to do that, we introduced the NREGS. Some of us fought tooth and nail, right, to say that those who want to get themselves skilled instead of do manual work. Because in 3 months, 6 months, you can get vocational training, be certified, and go and find a job so that you don't come back for the NREGS next year. We said this should be allowed. So everything was agreed. When the notification, in India, you pass the law or you pass the bill in Parliament, and then some people sit down and write down the law, and then it is notified. Right? So when the notification came out, that line was removed. Right? That skilling is allowed, which we fought for more than 3 months to get it in. So that is what I am saying. That I'm not asking you to be profligate and spend money. But what I'm saying is set your priorities right. Of course fiscal discipline is good, right? But if today I have to borrow a certain amount of money to build infrastructure Am I going to look at the fiscal discipline? I'm going to look at, have I planned the infrastructure correctly? Is this the right way to do it? How much will it pay off? When will it pay off? Those are the things I'll be worried about. If it has to be done, it has to be done.
Okay, Shukri?
You know, meeting the current account deficit, I've got some interesting figures which came from a newspaper a few days after the import duty hikes were talked about, and the 3.7% that we are talking about, that works out to be about 70 billion US dollars. So about 70 billion. Now what this newspaper reported that our imports on what the newspaper thought were non-essentials, a certain group of non-essentials were about 1.3 billion US dollars. Now, we could stop those imports without anyone really getting hurt. And what were the imports? The imports were apples, liquor. Yeah, we can't stop liquor, but there was apples, liquors, cashews, and dolls.
Not gold.
Not gold. This is ex-gold. The other is the gold story. Now, if you remember, whichever I mentioned about the trade deficit, the thing is, it appears that there's a turn in the trade deficit, as I mentioned at the beginning of it. So there's an 11.2% increase in exports and a 6.2% fall in imports. A large part of it owing to a compression of the gold imports. And the gold story, if you remember, I told you, ties up with the rural story. By a rough reckoning, around 40% of gold demand is rural demand. And why does this exist? Because large parts of rural India, and again, this is maybe I'm converging towards Shubhashish's point, is that one thing that we have failed to look, both from the private sector and to a certain extent from the public sector. The public sector has been looking at it, but not maybe imaginatively enough, is what do you do about the rural population who have savings? What about their financial needs? Financial needs not in terms of taking loans. They may be having savings which they want to invest, right? Is bank penetration good enough? And if it's penetrated, whether the people rely on the bank for that? That's the big question. Because again, by an NCAER study, at least about 2 years back, 40% of rural people held their savings in cash. So, and they're also thinking about, there's a huge gold demand. Now, the issue is they're both consumers, savers. So when they buy gold, these households are actually thinking that they're not exactly sure whether they're consuming or saving, but it's probably a consumption for some people, but it's largely a saving for others. So actually they're saving. So if there were two options, either they could be converted into consumers, or this saving could be converted into financial savings. It would be a great help. But coming back to your issue of the current account deficit, gold compression is going to make a big difference. So gold and silver is this big target item. So that's going to compress the deficit itself. Now, as far as meeting the deficit is concerned, I'll definitely convey your sentiments about your willingness to take up a bond like the Emerging India bond used to be, or the Resurgent India bond kind of stuff. But we'll give it a nice name for that if it comes out. But yes, I think let's see how it goes. It can be considered.
I understand the hesitation on that part. I will not trouble you anymore on that, but please go ahead and ask your questions and do identify yourself. Yes, sir, please.
My name is Henry Chen. I'm a PhD economics student at SMU. It's my first encounter with the Indian economy because I'm writing a paper for the school journals. So please permit me if I quote some figures wrong. I have two questions, one directed at each of the panelists. The first one is for Mr. T. Now, I understand from the figures that I was able to research, India's government debt to GDP is 70%. The external debt is only 25% officials. But the paper quotes that there's a $172 billion refinancing requirement this year. So, and I also noticed that the Reserve Bank of India, actually from January to May, has 3 times cutting the discount rate of 25 basis points each. Then all of a sudden on July the 15th, you have this 200 basis point jack up. So my point is that with such a very long-term debt ratios, and with such a huge immediate refinancing requirements, is there something wrong in the management position of Reserve Bank of India?
No, I mean, you see, the thing is that the objective of the 200 basis point rise was to do with curbing the volatility of the exchange rate itself, right? And it had something to do also with the feeling that probably, I'm guessing that this is something to do with the idea that there may be people within the Indian market who would borrow short term and play the exchange.
No, my question is this. You have a long-term debt, official debt of 400 billion,
Right.
but you have 172 billion immediate 12 months refinancing requirements.
Right.
So the Indian Reserve Bank somehow somewhat overlooked this problem in the early part of the years? Then
No,
you will price sudden break?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's because there is a.
That's referring to ECB repayments.
Are you
Are you
referring to
referring to the
ECB?
external commercial borrowing prepayments that are coming up?
Yeah, that's what I mean is that obviously there's a lot of short-term commercial refinancings going on.
Oh, I thought you were talking about, because you mentioned the government debt of 70%, right?
No, that's the domestic and international debt, 70, so that's all right nowadays.
No, right. So you are.
But the external debt is only 25%, about 400 billion.
Right.
But what is shocking is that there's 172 billion immediate financing requirement. So obviously there's a lot of commercial refinancing, very short-term loan
Right.
going on. So what I mean is that in the early part of this year, you cut interest rate, and all of a sudden you have to jack it up so high to defend the currency.
Yeah.
So apparently the Reserve Bank of India in the earlier part of this year did not get the picture very correct.
No, I mean, see, the thing is, if you are,
He doesn't work for the Reserve Bank.
yeah, I don't, but to that
Your boss will be the governor, right?
yeah, that, but I still wouldn't work for that. I'm still with the government of India. But having said that, I'm just speculating on what you're saying. Is that if they didn't do that, you would still have a balance sheet crisis for those companies which have taken loans in foreign exchange, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't try to stop this volatility, you would still have a problem, because this debt, if it is in US dollars, it would inflate in rupee terms.
No,
With the
your measure
depreciation.
today is understandable, but what I mean is that is there really some miscut at the earlier part of this year? Right now you're doing the right thing.
No, I mean, if we knew all this would happen in the earlier part of this year, we would have taken steps to.
But as a borrower, you're better off if your rupee is going to depreciate.
Yeah, in real terms. No, but if you have a balance sheet problem, then you can have a balance sheet problem.
Now, Mr. Chidambaran, the minister, on April 19, he gave a talk at Peterson Institute of International Economics. Actually, he seems to have a prognosis what is coming. And
I don't think so, because I mean, the global markets react to the way Mr. Ben Bernanke sneezes, and he didn't alert him that he's going to sneeze a month later. So I think that's difficult. I mean,
no,
but
he was
you-
in the webcast.
if you have you said you mentioned you have another question.
Yeah, the other question is this. Since you mentioned about the 60 years old average farmer's age, now my question is this. India has, based on the per capita income data, India's proportion of service is very, very high. Now the problem is that I think the consumer price index, food is easily about 35 or even more percentage component of the food, if I guess it right. Now the problem is that with this aging process of the agricultural sectors, and then everybody moved into service, now, and you have such a high composition of food in the CPI, so maybe in the long run, the economy could be very inflationary prone.
Well, again, we have to look a little bit of the theory to be able to follow this, right? And I'll give you an example of what happened in 2008, since at that time I had direct access to the data. Now, prior to the financial crisis, there was an inflationary episode, right, throughout the world, and it was particularly bad in India. And one of the, so even before the financial crisis, we had to address this crisis. Because in India, the moment inflation crosses double digits, right, all hell breaks loose. So, but if you had broken that down systematically, you would have seen that food price inflation was indeed high. And the only difference that year compared to what happened in the earlier years, that is to say 2007, 2006, the earlier 3 years I saw, is that oil prices also went up. So this food inflation, and this is why I say our economists need to be questioned. The food inflation in 2008, just the food price inflation, was actually less than what it was in the earlier years. But since we look at aggregate inflation, and oil prices were going down, right, so it didn't show up. But in this particular year, even oil prices were going up, and so it showed up overall. Then the economists found out that, hey, food prices are also rising. The poor are getting affected. So I did some analysis, and we broke up the farming community of the agricultural community into small, medium, large, and wage laborers. And there is this net benefit ratio that you can calculate using micro theory. What one could show using data that was available is that the small farmers, the medium farmers, the large farmers obviously were all better off because of the food price inflation. What is interesting is that the medium farmers, the middle level farmers, were the least better off. Why? Because they do not operate in the labor market. Small farmers do, and large farmers have lots of land, so it doesn't matter for them. Now this immediately gives you a clue, so we went down and looked at the nominal wage inflation, which was way ahead of the food price inflation. So this thing we have, which is a very macro picture, aggregated, of a steady state economy, right, that if inflation happens then everybody is worse off. But here is a structural change going on. So we have to dig a little bit deeper and look at the income distribution changes that are going on, right? So with this inflation that you are saying, so what if that inflation is going on? As long as incomes are staying ahead of it, especially for the poorer sections of the people, then why do we bother? That's the way to go.
Okay, Mr. C.
One from SARS. I ask a very layman question because from the presentation by the two excellent speakers, that from the data presented, there's something wrong with the Indian economy, fundamentally. And yet, why is there so much anxiety and concern about the Indian economy? Firstly, the Standard & Poor rating almost classified Indians almost a junk bond rating, and this concern about the rupee, devaluation. It's not a free fall like the Indian rupee. Indonesian rupee during the 1997 crisis, but it's a great concern about the Indian economy. Why is that so? Is it played up by the press or what? Can you give explanation? Because otherwise, things is all right so far, given by the two presidents, the speakers here.
Maybe you have two views on this.
No, I did not say that everything was all right. I said the reason for not feeling all right is not what we are seeing now. The reasons for not feeling all right are the things that are wrong in the Indian economy is that we are not seeing 4 or 5 years hence the type of trouble that is brewing outside of what the economic data are showing. Right? That's where we are making the mistake. It's not that there is nothing wrong, but it's not, in these pictures that we are seeing. I really don't care what S&P says. Right? They were the ones who failed to predict the crisis. Right? And I remember, I think within, because that time I was in the government, so within a week or 10 days, right, S&P, the rating agency, one of the worst offenders during the crisis for not having predicted it, right? And Lehman Brothers, they gave a higher rating. They had the gall to downgrade India. And India faced no problem with the crisis till we stopped lending. Again, if you follow the Indian financial, what India did during the financial crisis, when we got hit, and that is what slowed us down. We got hit because again everybody said, oh, banks are, really, they're worried, they should not lend, the economy is collapsing, right? Then Indian banks went back to those norms and they decided not to do risky lending. Now what was the most risky lending according to our Basel, credit weightages, risk weightages? On lending to non-bank financial corporations. Non-bank financial corporations support the entire small and medium businesses in India. They all give secured loans because they give against either working capital or in actual assets. So they were, the least risky loans. They were all secured loans. But that is the one we stopped. Why? Because there are a bunch of macroeconomists, right, who are looking at data at the macro level, but not understanding the process by which India works. So that started squeezing the small and medium enterprises, which was the major engine of growth in India till that time. So that is what is wrong in the Indian economy, that we do not look at our own economy, right? We borrow models, we don't understand the mechanics of the equations behind the model, we just look at the outcomes and try to associate those outcomes with what we are observing. That's what is wrong with the Indian economy.
Can I ask one?
I think, Shukri, what I'll do is that I suddenly realized that there's something called refreshments, which is of course a good thing to have at the end of the program. We have some time. I think what I'll do is I'll just fall back on the traditional method of collecting questions, and then maybe we can both of you can address them together. Okay, so I'll go in this direction. I've identified 3 hands. Yes, please.
In recent times, there was a lot of...
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Aparna. I'm from the NUS Faculty of Law. I'm a final year student at the university. In recent months actually, we've heard a lot of things being spoken and written about FDI, foreign direct investment into India, and how it is really at this time it is not coming in at the rate it should. But also listening to statements from industry leaders like say Ms. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw, who recently spoke that she herself had no confidence to invest, and private or domestic investment, corporate investment itself did not have the confidence to invest. And looking at actions like Mahindra, which is looking at overseas expansion and acquisition, what sort of indication? I mean, if the people inside do not have the confidence to invest, then what is the confidence that people from outside, which is the FDI, can materialize over the period of time and therefore give that economic boost that is needed? Because the confidence of industry leaders like Kiran Majumdar-Shaw has made very pessimistic statements about her own investments. It looks to me that even individuals like me would not like to invest at that scale in India.
Okay. Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Santhosh Babu. I'm a civil servant from India. I'm doing MPM program here. I'm very intrigued by what Professor Gangopadhyay said about skilling. Because, the NREG program started with a presupposed with the idea that our people don't have potential to do much more than manual labor. That is something which intrigued all of us. But subsequently came the National Skills Development Corporation, which actually is now doing a lot of work, actually taking people out of the rural areas to urban areas, which doesn't do justice to our economy either. So my proposition here is, why don't we as a government think about providing urban opportunities in rural areas? Because I, as a bureaucrat, pioneered a concept of rural BPO, and I found that youngsters could be trained overnight, and they could work with the best in the world. So a lot of industries who are probably doing huge amount of work, paying huge amount of money for a low-level job, and paying them very high, say in Bangalore and Chennai and Delhi. Suppose we were able to do this low-level job with low-level educated people and pay them higher, it could bring about a huge revolution. I'm talking about a concept as against Pura, that's providing urban amenities in rural areas. As opposed to that, why don't we provide urban opportunities in rural areas?
Maybe we can collect 2 more questions. Yes, please. 1, 2.
My question is directed to Professor Gangopadhyay. He talked about the food habits changing in the rural India, and they are going towards taking more healthy diets about vegetables, fruits, milk and other things. If that be the case, then why we are coming with the food security bill, in which we will be spending more than 1 lakh crore, in which only the food grains would be provided. If the purchasing power is really increased and they can afford more costly foods out there, then why are you giving them wheat and rice down below? By the way, I'm also in the Civil Services India. I'm in the Masters in Public Management course. So probably this needs to be answered. The other thing is, if everything is well, why the currency has depreciated by 15% in the last 3 to 4 months' time? Any specific reason? Your current account deficit levels are the same as were in 1991. And in fact, if you see the composition of your current account deficits, some of them is that you can't do anything about it. 70% of your oil requirements are through imports, and the other component is gold import, which are more or less committed. Now you're increasing the duty to reduce that. So my question is that if a situation has to be managed, then can't we look at these things and see something that in the mind of the investors there is more stability? You say falling currency is no concern. Yes, it is a concern for an investor who comes to the country. It is even a concern for a person who has done the foreign borrowings. He has to return more money back outside the country. So why it is not a concern? If your currency is so unstable, who would be interested in investing in India? Please.
Okay. Yes, and Prof. Okay, Prof. You first.
Okay, thank you. I'm Lupi from East Asia Institute. My first question is about the short-term economic fluctuation. So given Dr. Day's comments, it seems you believe that the economy is still in a normal rate of growth. So do you think the short-term monetary and fiscal policy in India is currently too tight or too loose? Does it need to be some more stimulus or less stimulus? And the second question is about long term. If you want to recommend to the Indian government like the Abenomics 3 arrows, so what would be the 3 arrows you would recommend for the most urgent economic reform for India? Thank you.
So one final question.
Yeah, I'm Sanjeev Shah. I live in Singapore now. I also run a business in India. I've lived there for a long time. So it seems to me that whenever we have a discussion about India, the elephant in the room is hardly talked about. You can have the best of policies. I mean, we have great brains in India, but we lack the backbone. And you can have all these schemes, but we all know the leakages that take place. You can have the best of policies at the ground level. We know how badly they're implemented. What is being done to address that basic problem? I mean, that to me seems is the real issue. And what can economists do within our country, our policymakers, to address that issue?
We have to close by 4:45, so I'll give maybe just a few minutes to all the panelists. Which is, I think, most of the questions are probably for you.
Those questions.
Okay.
Macro questions.
Let me start with the FDI. There are still deals coming through. So if and remember, FDI ultimately we club it all together as FDI, but these are deals. These are deals of very often or investment opportunities. They vary from industry to industry, state to state. So if you saw the data that I presented, this year, actually for the period we are comparing, the FDI we have got is more than last year. And FDI is very lumpy. So just because I'm showing you with a bit of slide of a statistical slide, I'm not trying to bamboozle you into anything. Even I would not go by that and saying that this, if you project it onwards, is going to be the yearly FDI. Because it's extremely volatile, it's extremely lumpy. The deals we know that are going on are the Jet Etihad one is going on, they're negotiating. The one we also know the famously, what's the furniture producer? IKEA is going on. But this also shows you the complexity of the Indian economy and also the complexity of the type of FDI is coming. You see, what is happening is FDI is increasingly complex, no longer simple. So you have this guy who makes furniture and comes and tells you that we want to set up a furniture shop, but we also want a cafe in it, right? So that involves, and that's why things get delayed, because it involves a whole set of different agencies who would look at whether you should have what are the licensing for having a food joint within. This was not there in the past. In the past, if you wanted to set up a steel plant, you set up a steel plant. You didn't say, I want to set up a steel plant and a Coke bottle unit, right? So that's one thing. So, and going by, I mean, I respect Ms. Majumdar for herself as an entrepreneur, but a lot of investment, again, what you do is you compare, if you have the money to invest, you compare all your options. So people have feel free to go on with the options. So that's my view on it. Should I continue?
Yeah, sure.
Or down the list? skilling video, that was yours. Cat.
You're picking up the easy questions.
No, that's if you assume macro is easy. That's your assumption as a microeconomist, that theoretical microeconomist, that macro is easy. Yeah. The CAD and the falling currency. I don't say that it's not, if it were not a concern, you would have had the finance minister say that we are trying to manage the CAD. It is a matter of a concern, but just to correct you on your this thing, it's nowhere compared to 1991. The way you look at it is to see your foreign exchange reserves in terms of the amount of
Is the not the absolute amount? How many months of import it can finance?
Right.
That is what we have to look to. The
Yeah, so
economy is much bigger.
So that time it was 3 weeks. Now it's 7 months.
Okay.
It's 7 months now, and that's generally RBI believes. I think I'm not sure, but I think 3 months is seen as a safe limit. That's generally going by that. And there was short-term fluctuations versus normal. This is really interesting territory, and maybe we should sit over a cup of coffee over this. But yes, long-term is something that we, one of the things that I've been trying to show you, including with the Balassa Samuelson, is the interesting thing about the long-run equilibrium and the short-term fluctuations. We know through the crisis and otherwise, I've been working recently on DSG models, very interesting. And I can't confess, this is something I think we as a profession are not exactly clear about, how the real economy interacts with the financial economy. And that's something we are seeing now. And I think it is good. I say it's good because lots of papers to be published on this, right? Lots of research to be done on this. Is how does the financial, and this is a typical episode. What we are discussing here now, what's wrong? One of the things we are discussing is, oh, the exchange rate is going like that. Why is the exchange rate going like that? Because the Fed is saying that sometime we'll move out of this. How does it affect the real economy? It does in some way, but frankly, I think even very good macroeconomists have not been able to figure out how it works, but it does. It somehow turns to, whether it's through credit flows, whether it's through confidence. The way you do it in DSG models have these shocks, look at confidence shocks and consumer confidence and so on. So it probably affects the confidence, and that's actually scary, but also needs to be worked on. It's scary because if the news spreads like wildfire that things are going wrong, which actually fundamentally may not be. It may be a sentiment thing. So that's your question. When it comes to long run, I think one of the things we need to look at, let me say, you said 3 things, let me just tell you one big thing, is the so-called demographic dividend. This young lot of people who are coming, how do we skill them, which connects to the skilling thing. How also we skill them and create a good human capital pool to push us on a higher growth path. I think that is crucial. Skilling and giving jobs to the young. Okay.
Last word, Shubhashis.
I will not answer all the questions, but only the ones I can. So first is the National Skill Development Corporation, which was set up again, coincidentally in 2008. Now, the real problem with the NSDC is, again, this is where I know Kiran Majumdar-Shaw has said that, lots of business people say that. I also remember that in 2008, the same Indian businesses insisted on a National Skill Development Corporation. It was made and handed over to them, and they ran it for 5 years without anything more than a cup of tea meeting, right? So, I'm not so sure about what exactly the Indian businesses want, right? Seriously. Because the NSDC was set up with a lot of fanfare and it was handed over to the private sector, right? And you know that. Now it is working, right? But it is working at such low levels of activity. We are talking about millions, right? 5 million a year is what the target we had set. And they'll probably not do 5 million in 25 years at the rate at which they're going. So, so this is a complete bunkum, right? This no skill, no this, no that. Right? However, and that is again because we're barking up the wrong tree. I think what we need to understand with Indian businesses, since you're also involved in that the central government can do nothing about what is going on. We keep barking up the wrong tree. It is at the state level. Land is a state issue. Almost all the clearances that you need to start the business is a state issue. So why are we running around Delhi trying to figure out what is wrong with the Indian economy? And every time our economists or our policymakers try to paper this over and say nice things about India, they're making the situation worse. Right? We should, target the people who are complaining to the respective states, because it's on the ground. It's like wanting to set up a factory in the EU, so I go to Brussels. No, you don't do that. And you don't do that in India either. You don't go to Delhi anymore. Those reforms have been done immediately after 91. So we have to understand these processes. Otherwise we're not going to address this problem. On skill, one thing I would like to point out, however, is that we work in various villages. It's part of the activities that we do to do, real experimentation rather than lab experimentation. So, and one of the things we found was remarkable, that if you go to the villages, what is happening is remote villages are still a problem in India, right? And they are getting connected through this, and also this Bharat Nirman, right? So they are getting connected, they are getting modernized, etc., etc. But really the change that is taking place is that there is a huge migration that is taking place from remote villages to villages which are closer to cities. And this is best observed if you look at around highways what is happening. Now again, our economists are claiming from the rooftops that because of this new liberalization, poverty rates have gone up. And where the development is most, the poverty rates have gone up the most. Now if I just look at the data, they are spot on. But if I look at the process of what is happening, is that where these developments are taking place, people are migrating from remote rural areas to near highway rural areas, getting better jobs than what they had there. But because they're coming into the lower echelons of that particular society, the poverty rate around this region is growing. Right? Now, unless you're ideological, if we are ideological, we will not dig deep and find out why this is happening. The problem in India is that we are ideological. We either have market fundamentalists or we have the anti-neoliberalists, right? So there is no discussion on these issues. But if one goes deeper down into what is going on, then one can see the process of change. And that is what we need to capitalize on, rather than always shouting from the rooftops, depending on which ideology we belong to, that everything is going down the drain.
Thank you. I think I cannot summarize this. I also won't try to summarize this because there's no final word on this. I mean, as an economist, I just feel sad that we have been caught between terrorists and fundamentalists, even though it could be a fiscal terrorist and a fiscal fundamentalist. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today, all the whole audience, all the participants. I have the pleasure of handing you over this book written by Ambassador C. Token of our appreciation for spending your time. Thank you so much, and do join us for tea outside. Thank you.